Bree comes across as an unremarkable place, a small remote town located in a sea of wilderness. It has no notable monuments, no notable people, and its inhabitants live in their own little bubble, mostly insulated from the comings and goings of the outside world. But Bree is remarkable. It's the only place where men and hobbits coexist. It's apparently the westernmost town of men in all of Middle-earth. It's the only town within a 300-mile radius, and perhaps, most importantly, it's one of, if not the oldest town in the Westlands of Middle-earth. In this video, let's talk about Bree. When you think of old in Middle-earth, you might think of Rivendell or Minas Tirith, places full of history and culture, not some small town in the middle of nowhere. But Bree, perhaps not the town, but at least the region, has been inhabited for a very long time. Since the First Age, in fact. During their 300-year-long journey westwards, many of the Edain stopped and settled in the vast lands of Middle-earth, becoming the ancestors of men such as the Northmen or the Dunlendings. One such group, related to the House of Beor, stopped in the central lands of Eriador and would become the first men to inhabit the region of Bree. One such tradition of theirs was to bury their dead in the nearby hills, later known as the Barrow Downs. In the Second Age, these men would go on to be known as the Men of Eriador by the Númenóreans and the Elves, separate to the Gwytherim who lived in Enedwaith, who were related to the House of Haleth. The Men of Eriador were on friendly terms with the Númenóreans and the Elves, the latter of whom they were also frightened of. These men survived the War of the Elves and Sauron, which devastated the lands of Eriador, and the men who lived in the region of Bree were joined by Gwytherim, who were fleeing from their homelands in Enedwaith and Minhiriath. We're unsure of whether the town of Bree was founded by this point, but it almost certainly was by the beginning of the Third Age, when it became part of the heartland of the Kingdom of Arnor. The town was located at an extremely important strategic location, right next to the crossroads of the East-West Road, which ran from Lindon to the Misty Mountains, and the North-South Road, which ran from Fornost to Pelargir. This meant that any travellers or goods coming from any direction would have to pass through or near to Bree. When the dissolution of Arnor occurred in 861 of the Third Age, Bree remained part of the senior kingdom of Arthedain. However, given it was only slightly to the north of the East-West Road, and was only a several-day journey from the fortress of Amon Sul, Bree was right on the frontier of the Civil War, part of an area contested by both Cardolan and Rhudaur. Although Arthedain and Cardolan end up repairing their relationship upon the arrival of Angmar, it's likely that Bree did see active or sporadic fighting for the better part of several centuries. This might have been a contributing factor as to why the town was so small, despite its strategic location. With the coming of Angmar, the town of Bree was joined by a new population, hobbits, who were fleeing westwards from the increasing shadow in the lands to the east. These hobbits founded several towns and villages in Breeland, but only those in Bree and its surrounding villages ended up surviving to the end of the Third Age. Nevertheless, this made Bree the only known place in the Westlands of Middle-earth where men and hobbits lived literally side by side. In 1356 of the Third Age, the wars against Angmar would begin, and by 1409, the Weather Hills and Amon Sul had fallen, Cardolan was devastated by an invasion, and Angmar's hordes were near to Fornost, the capital of Arthedain. Despite the war being so nearby, Bree appears to have survived relatively untouched, seemingly deemed unimportant by Angmar's forces. Although the hobbits had been continuously fleeing from the shadow, most of them don't leave Bree for their newly found Shire until 1601, when the situation in Arnor had stabilised. In 1636 and 1637, the Great Plague arrives from the south. Although it's stated that Fornost and most of Arthedain were little affected, given Bree's close proximity to Cardolan and the Shire, two lands that were devastated by the Great Plague, it's possible that Bree wasn't spared either. More alarming for the Breelanders was the situation unfolding in the nearby Barrow Downs, where the last Dunedain of Cardolan had perished to the plague. With its defenders dead, evil spirits from Angmar infested the old burial grounds, turning it into a deadly place where only the brave or stupid would go. Arthedain's attempts to reclaim the Barrow Downs in 1851 ended up failing. In 1974, Angmar overruns Arthedain, capturing Fornost and the North Downs, driving its surviving people beyond the River Luin into Lindon. Thanks to the arrival of an army from Gondor, Angmar is defeated the following year, and Arthedain is freed. But due to the devastation and depopulation, Chieftain Aranarth chooses not to refound his kingdom. Notably, Bree is one of only two managed towns to survive the war, the other being Tharbad to the south, which survived thanks to being so far from the front line. The reason for Bree's survival is unknown, and the state of the town of Bree during the war is never specified. Like Fornost and the Shire, it could have been overrun by Angmar's forces, and its people may have taken refuge in the Chetwood or the Old Forest. This might have ensured that enough of them survived to keep the town going after the war was over. Alternatively, Angmar's forces may have never even attacked the town, or perhaps they might even have been held off until they retreated. Either way, Bree survived the war, whereas the rest of Arthedain did not. Following the fall of Arnor, Bree, along with the Shire, remain as an island of civilization in an increasingly widening sea of wilderness. The ruins and roads of the old kingdoms are reclaimed by nature, and the wilds become dangerous, home to wolves, trolls, and other dangerous creatures. In 2480, orcs closed the passes in the Misty Mountains, further isolating Eriador from the lands to the east. From 2740 to 2748, orcs invade Eriador, culminating in the Battle of Greenfields, which takes place in the Shire. The long winter occurs in 2758, devastating the surviving populations in Eriador, especially that in the Shire. In 2911, the Fell Winter occurs, and the following year, devastating floods ruin Tharbad, breaking the bridge and forcing its abandonment. By the end of the Third Age, Bree is the last surviving remnant of the Kingdom of Arnor. So what was Bree like? We're unsure what Bree was like for most of its existence, but by the War of the Ring, it was a fairly small town. It's described as being at least 100 stone houses, with an unknown amount of hobbit holes dug into the side of Bree Hill. Its western and southern perimeter is defended by a thick green hedge, and a deep ravine, whereas the northern and eastern perimeter is protected by the hill itself. A notable building within Bree was the Inn of the Prancing Pony, which was owned by the Butterbur family. A 3-story tall, double-winged building that was an important centre of commerce and news for the region. Bree wasn't the only settlement in the area. Nearby were 3 smaller satellite villages. On the southeastern side of Bree Hill was Staddle, a village primarily populated by hobbits. On the northeastern side of Bree Hill was the village of Combe, nestled in a deep valley. To the northeast of Bree was Archet, which was located in the edge of the Chetwood. Exact population figures for the region are never given, but given the description of Bree, it might have been as many as 2,000 or 3,000 people. There is no mention of Bree having a government, or indeed any sort of political system, but it might be assumed that the town had a mayor or some form of local council, as men such as Harry Goatleaf were employed as official gatekeepers and presumably had to be getting paid by someone. As for the town's economy, we know that silver pennies were used, but given that the town probably didn't have a mint as they probably had no silver mines, these coins may have originated from the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, or perhaps were the same coins that had been used since the days of Arnor. Despite being located at the crossroads of 2 great roads, Bree had become increasingly isolated by the War of the Ring. Genuine travellers coming up the north-south road, then known as the Greenway because of how overgrown it had become, were increasingly rare, and were instead replaced by refugees and ruffians from the lands to the south. Companies of dwarves would occasionally travel along the east-west road, stopping in Bree when going to or from the Blue Mountains. From the west, Bucklander hobbits would also occasionally travel to Bree, or Bree hobbits to Buckland, but this had also mostly ceased by this point. Elves, although they passed through the region, were never described as stopping in the town itself. In reality, Bree's most frequent visitors were the surviving Dunedain of Arnor, the Rangers of the North. The Breelanders were normally quite skeptical of the Rangers of the North, and although they tolerated their presence, they didn't exactly enjoy it. But the Rangers of the North actually played an important part in Bree's survival, chiefly as the town's main defenders. As Aragorn put it, there were foes a day's march from Bree who could destroy it, if not for the watchfulness of the Rangers. This has proven to be partially true. When the Nazgul drive away or slay the Rangers protecting Bree, they entered the town easily and could have done significant damage if they wanted to. During the winter of 3018-19, ruffians attack Bree, and although the Breelanders are victorious, several of them are killed in the skirmish. The dangers that lurked in Eriador are probably what ensured Bree's small size, despite centuries of relative peace. The Rangers could do enough to protect the town, but the wilds surrounding it were the haunts of orcs, trolls, wolves, Barrow-wights, and other evil creatures. It's likely that any attempt to found new settlements or expand Bree's power probably met with failure, meaning that the Breelanders would have adapted to living within their means, and became content with it. Although this meant that the Breelanders lived an insular, mundane lifestyle, it helped guarantee safety. In fact, the safety of Breeland was only truly compromised when locals such as Harry Goatleaf and Bill Ferny started getting involved with external forces, but their personal ambitions were not shared by most Breelanders. Following the War of the Ring, King Elessar founds the reunited kingdom, reclaiming the old lands of Arnor, with the exception of the Shire. Repopulating the lands of Old Arnor would have certainly taken a long time, but it could be assumed that Bree, as the largest and seemingly only managed town in the region, would have played an important role in those ventures, as the main hub and supplier of any people who were looking to recolonize old lands. It's likely the old roads would have been repaired fairly quickly, and Bree would have once again become a bustling centre of trade, as it had been in years past. It just goes to show how old Bree's history is. It was there long before Elendil. It was there when Elendil's kingdom began, it was there when Elendil's kingdom ended, and it was there when Elendil's kingdom began again. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I put up a poll several months ago asking what series I should do next, and some genius commented that I should simply do all of them. And that's what I'm doing. So this is the first video I'll be doing on some of the towns, cities, and fortresses in Middle-earth. I'll also be doing one on kingdoms and nations. My video on Rhovanion was one of those. Anyway, don't want to spoil everything. Cheers, farewell, and remember, the upper-class city folk of Bree probably look down on the uneducated country folk from Archet.